I'd like to thank my colleagues who were able to get here. I know that we've all been dealing, most of us have been dealing with some weather challenges, so I want to thank those who have been able to brave the storms and get here. I think Mother Nature is trying to reward us with a little bit of sunshine. I think I saw it, and I want to thank everyone for coming. And I would like to do a short roll call of mayors, and then we'll get into the remarks, and I can start over here.
Mayor Pedro Seguera, Hartford, Connecticut.
Mayor Pulaski, Allentown, Pennsylvania.
Mayor Joy Cooper, City of Hallandale Beach, Florida.
Mayor Brian Waller, Piscataway, New Jersey.
Mayor Harry Lewosky, Plano, Texas.
Mayor Bill Finch, Bridgeport, Connecticut.
Mayor Mike Rawlings, Dallas, Texas.
Mayor Kasim Reed, Atlanta, Georgia.
Mayor Mick Cornett, Oklahoma City.
Mayor Kim McMillan, Clarksville, Tennessee.
Mayor Elizabeth Couts, Burnsville, Minnesota.
Mayor Frank Gorda, City of Pembroke Pines, Florida, 90 degrees and sunny.
Mayor John Mitchell, New Bedford, Massachusetts.
Mayor Malso, Frisco, Texas.
Mayor Brian Burnett, Rochester Hills, Michigan.
Mayor Shane Bemis, Gresham, Oregon.
Mayor Mike Bonner, Johns Creek, Georgia.
Paul Soglin, Madison, Wisconsin. Bill de Blasio, New York City. Greg Fisher, Louisville.
Nan Whaley, Dayton.
Sly James, Kansas City, Missouri.
Thank you all very much. So on behalf of the conference, I'd like to start my remarks by expressing our most sincere and deep sympathies to the families and the victims, as well as the entire community of Roseburg, Oregon. Over these 2 days, we are tackling a number of critical issues. This morning we discussed both our priorities as well as our strategy to ensure that those who wish to lead our nation during the next administration fully understand that cities are the engines of our national economy and are the center of every major issue in American public life. We have all seen the reports on our metro economies, and we know that there are so many great and cultural things happening in our cities of all sizes and over all parts of our country. We know that the strength of our cities and the metro areas are helping to bring our national economy back from recession. Each one of us could tell our stories of job creation. Each one of us could tell our stories of charging forward and making the tough decisions that are necessary to grow our economies, to strengthen our cities. Each one of us has that story to tell, but we also know that as we have these stories of growth and opportunity, many people still lack those opportunities. Many people still fear for their safety, and many feel disconnected from the broader community. This is something that I'm especially aware of leading a city that has experienced some serious challenges. From what you saw this past April, as well as historically, for decades before that. So today and tomorrow we'll focus on the troubling increase in crime that has impacted far too many of our cities, as well as police safety and accountability, issues that I have been addressing right here in Baltimore. As we confront challenges like these, our partnership with the federal government is threatened by the dysfunction in Washington that really cripples our progress. No serious candidate for president or Congress should allow that dysfunction to continue. Gridlock strangles Washington, and the consequences of that dysfunction, the consequences of that gridlock are passed along to us. Major campaigns like the ones that we're watching unfold today come once every 4 years, and mayors are uniquely positioned to influence the national dialogue. As mayors, we have a very large bully pulpit, and we can get our message out to great portions of our constituencies. We know that people are frustrated thus far. This campaign has not been wholly focused on issues that matter most to working families. We want to refocus the conversation about things that matter to people's lives in the cities that we serve, where the vast majority of people in this country live in our metro areas. So we've come together this weekend to define our priorities, which will be carried forward to the candidates and the public over the next 13 months. We will publish these priorities in a new document, the Mayor's Compact for a Better America, a 2016 call to action. The call to action will call upon the candidates, both the Democratic candidates and the Republican candidates, to invest and protect our America. Things like infrastructure, workforce training, innovation, clean air, clean energy, violence and public safety, how we can impact the health of our community. All of these things are issues that we have been discussing and will continue to discuss over the course of this conference. We will be discussing these issues today, tomorrow, and we will continue this conversation more in depth, including coming next week at the National Press Club. I know that there won't be total consensus on all of the issues in this document, but I know that we can find issues that Democratic mayors are willing to take to Democratic candidates, that Republican mayors are willing to take to Republican candidates, and that we all can commit to work on, regardless of who gets elected president or whatever the makeup of the next Congress will be. Because the one thing that mayors know how to do more than I think anyone else in the political sphere now is work together. We are a bipartisan group that knows how to put ideologies aside to focus on the things that matter most to our residents, because our job demands results, not debate. We believe Washington should learn something from us. Over these next 2 days, we'll be focusing on key matters before us in the current Congress, like the reauthorization of the Surface Transportation Act, which is unifying priority for this organization as we seek more local control over critical investments. As we define our federal priorities, we also know that mayors have been the type never to wait on others to get the job done. Mayors around the country have created and implemented best practices on each of the issues that we are putting forward in our compact. So we're not asking our candidates to do anything that we aren't willing to do ourselves. We must continue to share innovations with each other and with the broader community so we can maximize our impact with or without federal support. Again, I want to thank you all for being here. Before we open it up to a few questions, I would like to turn it over to the Vice President of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, Oklahoma City Mayor Mick Cornett. Mick?
Thank you, Mayor Rawlings-Blake. It's good to be back in Baltimore. We have had a vigorous discussion this morning on a wide variety of topics. President Rawlings-Blake has led us through the 10-point plan. We have almost all of us have had comments or tweaks or issues, and what I expect will ultimately come out of these efforts is a 10-point plan with a very broad consensus. We look at this as an opportunity. We don't elect presidents very often in this country, but it's clear that going forward, America's cities have needs, and we have issues, and we need these issues addressed. We are seeing growing responsibilities in our first responders and trying to deal with mental illness. We're seeing wide disparities in income levels, and how are we going to deal with this broadening gap between the wealthy and the not so wealthy? And how are we going to ensure our citizens that they have clean drinking water and smooth roads to drive on? How are we going to fund all of these things? We need a president who's willing to be a partner, who's willing to listen to us when necessary, who's willing to direct revenue directly to cities and not go through states and impede the process. So we have a loud voice. We intend to express it, and we look forward to talking to the candidates over the next few months and helping to determine who the next president of the United States is going to be.
Thank you very much. I also want to acknowledge our past president, Burnsville Mayor Elizabeth Couts. Do you want to say a few words?
Thank you, Madam President. One of the things that we know as mayors is that if you want cities to thrive and America to thrive, it's about roads, jobs, and housing. And these are the things that we've been discussing. So to just drill it down to those three things, this is what we need to do to ensure that American cities and our people continue to thrive, because people do prosper in America and businesses prosper in America. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I feel compelled to have who I call my cousin mayor from Dallas, Mayor Rawlings, if you want to say a few words. I'm going to pick a few mayors out, and then we'll open up for questions.
Thank you, Madam President. It's fun to be here in Baltimore to see a great place and a great part of America. I think what you've heard is this. Cities have created the growth in the United States. The future of the United States is critically based on that continued growth. The question is, what is the next president of the United States going to do about that? We ask all the media, we ask all the states to ask that question. Let's not dodge it. Are we going to invest and protect, or are we going to hunker down and hope this kind of goes away? It's a critical time for America. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayor Rawlings. I'm going to ask Mayor de Blasio.
Thank you so much. I want to thank Mayor Rawlings-Blake. I want to thank Mayor Cornett for their leadership. You know, one of the great things about the Conference of Mayors is it is predicated on the notion of all for one and one for all. And you can feel it when you're at these meetings, folks from every region of the country, different sized cities, Democrats, Republicans, Independents alike, but there's a lot we agree on, and we're going to use the weight of all of our cities and towns to have an impact on this national discussion. I'm very proud as a New Yorker to say one of the founders of the Conference of Mayors was our greatest mayor ever, Fiorello LaGuardia. And I think they understood back in the 1930s, in another time of great economic challenge, that mayors had a particular role to play in our national debate because we're the closest to the ground. Now, what's changed since then? Our cities are now ever more important because we are the ultimate engines of the national economy. That's much more true today than it was even 10 or 20 years ago. And I think what's important you'll hear from all these mayors is the fundamental investments in our infrastructure will allow us to thrive, to create opportunity, and help build the whole nation. If our cities do not get that investment, we can't move forward sufficiently as a nation. So it's very, very practical. Conference of Mayors says to Washington, D.C., to both sides of the aisle, invest so we can grow and we can create greater opportunity and greater equality of opportunity. We have not had a federal partnership that truly understands the strategic power of our cities in many years. And this is an ideal time. I think one thing that's energizing all of us, 2015, 2016 is an ideal time to change that discussion because none of the presidential candidates can afford to ignore the cities at this point, both because of what we mean politically and what we mean economically. So we are united in bringing these issues to the fore, state by state, in what's obviously going to be a very contested year and therefore a great time for a public debate. Just one other quick point I want to make in terms of all for one and one for all. And I think this is heartening to New Yorkers and everyone from the New York metropolitan area. We went through the pain of 9/11. Our first responders, over 70,000 first responders who aided in the rescue and recovery at Ground Zero. Many are still suffering the health impact. Well, this organization back in June at the annual meeting in San Francisco supported our first responders and called for an extension of the Zadroga Act. Mayors from all over the country, didn't matter where they were, they felt the responsibility to our first responders, and it's time for our Congress to feel that same level of responsibility. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor. And before we open it up for question, I'll ask Atlanta Mayor Kasim Reed to come up.
Good afternoon. When you look at the leading defense experts, certainly the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he recently said something that was very simple. And he said that the largest threat, or most significant threat to the safety and security of the United States is the country's financial health. And I think that that goes directly to cities. Because if you really want to move from having 2% growth or 2.5% growth to 3% GDP or 4% GDP growth, that you have to have cities that are thriving, healthy, and robust. And in order for us to do our work, we're going to have the appropriate level of focus on roads, bridges, tunnels, and infrastructure investment, which leading economists also say will move the needle on employment and well-paying jobs. And we're really hoping that as we have this national conversation around the presidential election, that people will look at the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. And no matter what you feel about it, $784 billion was deployed. 10% of that was directed towards infrastructure, and it yielded about 35% of the jobs that were well-paying. And so we have a very clear message today. If you want to get the country moving in the right direction, if you want to address income inequality and the long-term health of the United States of America, you're looking at the people who you need to work with. And we have another very clear message. The time has come to take the handcuffs off of cities' productivity by causing us to go through states for the resources that we need. We could do so much more if we develop a formula that delivers real dollars to mayors in a faster, more efficient way. The old 50-state model, as strong as the governor's lobby is outdated and bad for the United States of America. When cities receive grants directly, like the Choice Neighborhood Grant that we received in Atlanta on Monday, we know what to do with those dollars. When Mayor de Blasio gets a grant for a major infrastructure project in mass transit, or Mayor Stephanie Rawlings-Blake, we know what to do with these dollars because we've got a long infrastructure backlog list and we can deploy that money right away. So these are the things that we are talking about. We're going to be making our voices known as presidential candidates travel to cities across the United States of America. But I go back to my first point. If you really care about the safety, security, and financial health of the United States of America, you need to care about the mayors. Thank you.
Thank you very much. With that, we'll open up for a few questions. Yes.
Mayor de Blasio, do you want to take this opportunity to endorse a candidate for president?
That's very generous of you. This is a nonpartisan discussion, my friend.
With that, are there certain candidates right now that embody this group's wants and others that don't? Have you discussed certain concerns about certain candidates?
We haven't discussed concerns about particular candidates, but what I was very proud about was our discussion about how the Democratic mayors were very eager to take these issues that are important to cities to the Democratic candidates for president, and also how the Republican candidates were just as eager to have these conversations. While there may not be consensus on every issue, there is a unified strength in this organization that is committed to making sure that the candidates across, on both sides of the aisle are aware of what's important to cities and understand the vital importance of making sure that we continue to invest in cities and protect our cities.
Touching on the 10-point plan that you mentioned, are any points locked in at this point? Can you take us through the discussions right now?
Yeah, we're still in the midst of, I touched on some of them, and we've all touched on infrastructure investment is key for all the reasons that the mayors have stated. When you invest in building new roads and bridges, those are jobs that you can't export. So while it makes us a stronger community, it also provides opportunity for many who have been left behind in the recovery. So those are just a few of the things, but we will make sure that we're very clear coming out of the conference about the different points. Yes.
Have you discussed any specific plan to address the repeated mass shootings that occurred?
Not specifically. I will say not specifically. I can say that we've discussed the issue and how mayors can participate in the national dialogue in constructive ways, because we know that it is a very politically charged conversation. And as mayors, as I said earlier in my statement, we cannot rest on the notion that this is something that we can just argue about. As mayors, we have to get things done. We're not really interested in pontificating about who's right and who's wrong in this debate, but looking for ways that we can make meaningful progress. So yes, we're definitely having discussions. Does anybody else want to talk about that?
Good afternoon. We spoke earlier, and whether it's a gun control issue, we know as mayors on our streets that we also need to address the mental health issues. So I think it's a far more reaching than, the idea of owning a gun. Florida, for example, they want to arm everybody with a gun and are actually looking at, open carry laws. So if we can't get that logjam stopped on the national level, at least we can gather our voices and talk about mental health and the lack of those resources back to the mayors and how we can address the most needy in our community and those that are hidden behind those doors that can't get access to good health and good mental health resources.
Well, I think we all acknowledge there's been an increase in acts of what are considered random violence. I think it's also obvious that what we're doing now is not working to combat it. Now, what we do about it is where you start to see opinions divide. But I think we found agreement this morning in the areas of the underfunding mental health. It is what is overpopulating our jails, and we have turned our penal institutions into mental hospitals, which is not a humane way to treat the people that are being incarcerated. And it's also driving up our cost of public safety and our first responders. And 2/3 of my budget goes to police officers and firefighters. And there's been a breakdown in how we're funding mental health and dealing with it, and these acts of violence are just one of the repercussions.
With that, Education Secretary Duncan just a few days ago called on states and local municipalities to take 50% of nonviolent offenders and find solutions for them other than in prisons, saying it'll save $15 billion that can go into schools. Has that been discussed at all?
Are you directing that at me? Yeah. Mayor James.
There is evidence that a 40% increase or a 21% decrease in the amount spent in penal institutions and corrections applied to teaching, for example, would result in a 42% increase in teacher salaries, which would have a net effect of helping our educational system. And when you look at the population in penal institutions, overwhelmingly, disproportionately poor, black, and brown. And when you overlay that with the educational resources or actual lack of educational resources that are in those communities serving those folks, we could have a major impact on turning around a lot of things. Education is probably the best and most efficient way of denting the cycle of poverty. And the cycle of poverty is directly related to the cycle of crime and all sorts of other issues. So I agree with Secretary Duncan, who was in Kansas City talking about an issue very close to our hearts, which is early childhood education for 4-year-olds. We need to start making investments in the things that matter. And our children matter. They may not be 100% of the population, but they're certainly 100% of the future. And if we do not make those investments today as the world becomes much more technologically inclined, then we will again pay for this down the road and down the road and down the road. So if we flip incarcerating people to educating people, we're going to have a much better return on that investment.
Frank Ortis, Mayor of the City of Pembroke Pines, Florida. Our city invested in school resource officers in partnership with the School Board of Broward County. We feel that these school resource officers are so trained that these children, whether you're in elementary or in community college, will go to these resource officers and say, I just heard something. And so in answer to your question, that's the first step. Get to that first issue and see and investigate it. And I feel, and our city feels, that these students will go right to our school resource officers. It's not cheap, but it's good.
Well, I want to note, and I think this is something that gets a little misunderstood in the national political discourse. I want to point to Mayor Cornette's comments, because he raised so powerfully the question of mental health earlier in the session. It's something we in New York City are increasingly focused on as well. Well, you know, if you think about Oklahoma City and you think about New York City, some real differences in geography and the political backdrop, but you know, we're also two places that, for example, are both leaders in pre-K, and the state of Oklahoma has been outstanding in terms of its progress on pre-K, and we're very proud in New York City to have reached full-day pre-K for all our kids. And Mayor Cornett and I had the opportunity to speak to the issue of infrastructure spending by the federal government. We did a joint op-ed in the New York Times a few months back. I'm using it as just a little vignette of what happens here among mayors all the time. It doesn't matter if we're from different places. We are pointing to some of the foundational things that have to happen. So if you go to the question about the random violence, I think a lot of us would say, regardless of where you stand on the issue of gun regulation, we know that the trajectory of violence would be changed, one, by robust mental health plans that actually reach people, that reach the grassroots and destigmatize mental health services, and two, by reaching a lot of our young people earlier with educational opportunities. Those are two things I think unite a lot of mayors across the country, and we will bring that into the national debate and the presidential debate in a very sharp manner, which is the value added here. One thing I think you're going to see increasingly from mayors is we're not going to accept a national discourse that leaves out issues like mental health or leaves out issues like early childhood education, the things that we know actually could turn the tide on the realities we face, like random violence.
I want to acknowledge the mayor from down the road, Mayor Muriel Bowser. Thank you very much for joining us for this press conference. And before I close, and just to be clear for the press that has questions for individual mayors, they'll make themselves available. I guess you can connect with staff on that. Before we close, I do want to thank our CEO and Executive Director, Tom Cochran, who has done an amazing job for 47, am I giving you an amazing job for all 47 years? For 47 years. I'm very grateful for him and the entire team, the entire staff of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, working to ensure that these are thought-provoking, quality, constructive and productive conversations that we're having about moving our country forward. So thank you all very much.